Anyway, this week is going to be focused beyond the millennium. Last week I didn't go into depth about the millennium so much because there's not a lot that we know about it. There's some references in Isaiah that seem to indicate some things that go on there in the temple and some of the other prophets. But the truth of the matter is that we don't know a whole lot about what's going to be going on there. We know the animals will apparently be at peace, the lion with the lamb. And that's the general idea of that. And also, of course, it says, it references that someone dies at 100 years old, there'll be a child. So we know there's going to be a very long life, and Christ is reigning from Jerusalem. So we know some details, but I think God purposely has left most of it a mystery because we really wouldn't even begin to appreciate it. If when we get there, we're going to go, how could I have told people about this? It's going to be so good. But anyway, at the very end, there is something that happens, that there's going to be a final battle. Another topic where we know very, very little about it. And I think that's on purpose because in God's mind, the battle of Gog and Magog, the final battle, is a blip on the radar. In other words, it's not even important for us to know. He mentions it, but it's not a big deal, which only tells us in reverse or inverse the fact that all these other things are a big deal because he goes into depth about them. So we're going to look at the Great White Throne Judgment, which is the greatest event of all history past the garden. And then the three news: new heaven, new earth, the new Jerusalem. I know I'm being a little funny here, but we're going to see that there's going to be a lake of fire barbecue. I don't know. That might be on the edge, but bring a little humor to it. And then the 1,000-year lockup. I think that's what they call when they put a criminal behind bars. He's in lockup. So the biggest criminal of all time is going for a 1,000-year sentence of lockup. Millennial peace on earth, goodwill toward men. I got thinking about this. At Christmas time, we sing or we read this particular phrase, if you will, goodwill on earth, peace toward men and all that. That really, I think, is referring to the millennium because that's the first time in all history where that's going to be true. In other words, it's a desire that I think angels said it. So when Christ was born, and so it's, something that was a goal, maybe I can put it that way, a goal, a desire, but actually prophecy. We usually don't think about it, but I think that was prophecy because it was talking about the millennium. Satan released. We're going to find out he was locked up, the big lockup. And one of the biggest mysteries for many people is why is he released, and this battle goes on. The Great White Throne Judgment, we will be there and unbelievers will be there. And I'll try to explain that in the very little time we have. The three news: new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. Usually probably people don't consider it three news, but I thought that was something to help us remember it because everything is going to be new. You have a whole lot of new going on right there. The Lake of Fire barbecue. Forgive me if you don't like that, a little humor. I'm pretty much going to read down chapter 20 in our slides, and with a little emphasis, of course, but I'm going to start with the last part of 19 because I really think that when Bishop Langdon put in the chapters, it should have started about 1920 because before that was the Battle of Armageddon. Christ comes down with the armies of heaven, which will be us, and it describes that situation. And then as a post-log to that, it starts here with what I think would more fittingly go into chapter 20. The beast was captured. This is 1920. And with it, the false prophet who in its presence had worked the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshiped its image. These two were thrown into the lake of fire alive, and it talks about it burning with sulfur. Maybe there's sulfur there, but the thing is, John, he was familiar, obviously, with sulfur, and it has a horrible smell, and it catches on fire. As far as I remember my basic chemistry, I think at least it combined with some other things will explode. Maybe in gunpowder. I'm not 100% sure. And then it says, and he sees the dragon. Now, the dragon is one term for Satan. Serpent, my daughter and I were discussing yesterday, maybe even Leviathan. I think Leviathan may be a term, but all these are kind of creatures that may represent or be used to be a label for, identifier for Satan. And it bound him 1,000 years. So that's the big lockup, right? He's going into jail for 1,000 years. And threw him into the pit. Now, wherever the pit is, there are actually many hells, if you will, in the scripture. And in the Greek, there's at least 5 different areas of hell. Jesus discussed, I guess, all of them, depending on where you're reading in the gospel. And he shut it up and sealed it over him. So I think it's interesting that he's going to be sealed. He's going to be in the pit, which is obviously, I guess, is about as bad as you can get. What do they call that in prison? Solitary confinement. He's going to be in a big time lockup, and he's got a high maximum security seal over him there. And he will deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were ended. So like I was saying, at the end of the 1,000 years is when we just get a little information about what is called the Battle of Gog and Magog. And it says he must be loose for a little while. So I think, and I've heard it said, I think it's probably accurate, that God is doing this for a particular purpose, although it seems kind of inefficient. Why not just get rid of the devil? Why lock him up and let him out again? So, and this is 1,000 years of peace, 1,000 years of Jesus ruling over the earth, God ruling over the earth, perfect situation, much like Eden. And then all these people there are going to have children and grandchildren. They're all going to live a long time. There's who knows how many people are going to be on the earth. I believe it's going to be like in the early days. I have that Bible timeline book, shows me that Adam and all of them, Methuselah, lived very, very long times. They had tons of children and tons of grandchildren. I don't even think we can imagine how many people there were because of just the, what do they call that? Malthusian equation anyway. So the geometric growth of population over time. And when nobody dies, that means you end up with more and more people than ever, right? Today, people die off. So even though there are a lot of people propagated, they die off, and therefore the population grows, but not as fast as it would have in the beginning and in the millennium. So the thing is, why does God unleash Satan after 1,000 years when we have all these people in the earth in the perfect environment? Any ideas?
No.
I think it's not written there. The scripture doesn't blatantly state it. It's just a matter. I think that it's because it reminds me of an old comedian comedy hour or whatever. The Flip Wilson comedy hour was way back when. You kids probably don't remember it, but his catchphrase, every comedian has one, was "The devil made me do it." So nobody during the millennium can ever say the devil made me do it, no matter what they do. So God locked up the devil, so it was evident to everyone that it wasn't just the devil causing sin, destruction, death, and everything. Although the devil's a big actor in it, he's not necessarily the cause. Men's heart are the cause. And what's going to happen is the righteous from the tribulation are going into the millennium, and they're going to have children, but their children are not born righteous. Their children have to make the same decision we do today. And so they're going to go along with the program because Christ is the absolute ruler. There is no rebellion as such. tolerated, nor would most people want it. The people who are righteous are not interested in rebelling. That's why they're righteous. Their hearts are of the right type. But their children, after 1,000 years, some of them are going to resent Christ and want to do their own thing, just like human nature always does. And so this is to show that Satan is not the cause of sin and destruction and the fall necessarily, but that he had a part, but man's heart is the true cause of that degradation, if you will.
To show God's ultimate perfect justice.
Yes, and probably as much for the angels as for in all creation, whatever beings, so that they will see that God's judgment is righteous and true. People say, well, why can't God just save the devil? Well, the devil's it's like, unfortunately, like a lot of criminals, right? They go into lockup and they're in there for years and years, and they come out, and what's the first thing they do?
Another crime.
They go and do another crime because their hearts are bad. Unless they get born again in jail, most of them don't make it.
Yeah, you know what? I never thought about that. Like, why did you let Satan use you that? This is interesting.
Well, again, it's speculation, but I think it merits a little. Yeah, merits thinking about. At any rate, so the big lockup is over, and as we talked about earlier, the millennium, which is at the very end of the millennium, is this lockup undone and the battle of Gog and Magog. But it's 1,000 years of peace. And it's interesting because, we see in Matthew 6:10 that Christ prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Well, that's never happened, but it will happen for the first time ever, well, since the garden, in the millennium. The creation is going to be a creation at peace. I think we've all read Romans 8:22. We know that the whole creation is groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. In other words, there's a fallen creation, and we don't think about the creation. We think about us and our problems, but the creation is should I say, messed up, less than perfect for sure. The animals are going to be at peace, a number of references there. Humanity is going to be at peace, a child of 100 years of age. So in other words, we don't even know what he died from. I guess people could still fall and have accidents, hard to say. We're not given a lot of info, but apparently for some reason, I'm sure it wouldn't be disease because there's not going to be a sickness or disease, I'm relatively sure, in the millennium. Because all that's rebellion. There's no rebellion in the millennium. So he's released at the Battle of Gog and Magog. We're given very little information about it, but it says when the 1,000 years are ended, and Satan will be loosed from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations. I think that's a key word, deceive. He deceived Adam and Eve. He's always working in deception. And which are in the four corners of the earth. That's, I believe it's phrased that way because it means there are unbelieving people, rebelling people, not all of them, but all around the world. In the whole world and all their descendants of the millennium saints, they're going to have people that will rebel. Gog and Magog to gather them for battle. Well, Gog and Magog is used in Ezekiel 38, but why it's used again, I'm not really sure, because that in Ezekiel 38, that phrase means Gog and Magog are the Genesis 10 Table of Nations descendants in what we call Russia today, that area. So it may be that still, after all that time, that their descendants in that area are going to be the main rebels and focus of things. That's speculation. And they marched up over the broad earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. Well, that'd be Jerusalem. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them all. So looks like that particular battle does not last long. They all gather together. They get all, worked up. They come up to Jerusalem and they were gone. What's that old country song? And anyway, so so it's going to be an instantaneous thing there. 3-for-1 special. I made that up, but I like that. The beast and the false prophet, as we read in 1920, are the first ones to go into the lake of fire. Right? I know we think. Many people think the devil is in hell. Again, there's like 5 words: Sheol's one, Hades. Abraham's bosom, Tartarus, and the lake of fire. But anyway, all those can be and are loosely translated in English as hell. But in the Greek and in, I think, Hebrew, there's a number of words for what we call hell, and they're all very different, but this is not a lesson on that. So the devil is thrown into lake of fire, but there's already 2 guys in there. So now we got a threesome going here. We got a 3-for-1 special, right? The devil goes in there and his other 2 minions are already in there. So now we got all 3 of them in there, which, that's a hallelujah time right there. And they will be tormented day and night. We don't know what that really means. I guess what's that author Dante wrote something about the levels of hell. And there are some Christians that believe there are various levels of hell. I don't see any evidence for that in the scripture, but that I think may be a Catholic concept that came into the Catholic Church over time. But what is worse, hell or hell? what kind of level you want? That's kind of nonsense. I like these pictures. Anyway, the book. So after the Battle of Gog and Magog, which is the final punctuation of the millennium, then we're going to go into a judgment time. I believe it's out of time. In other words, at that point where it's going to be strictly a spiritual event, simply by the nature of the fact that God and Jesus and the angels and us, the dead people who have been brought to this judgment. I say dead people, the unbelievers who died, and their entities, their spirit and their soul, such as they are, will be there. And but anyway, artists have made various depictions of the judgment, but there's really only 2 books there. As far as I can see, I think most Christians understand that in the various commentaries. But there's 2 books, and one is the book of life. And what did Jesus say? Something about, he's talking about that they were doing all these signs and miracles, and they thought that was great.
Don't rejoice that the devils are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in the book of heaven. Or the book of life. Book of life,
right. So again, it's one of those understated principles that are like huge. So in other words, the real important thing is not even, all the things you've gone through. The real important thing is at this judgment, your name is in the book of life. So that begs the question, how do you get in the book? Any thoughts?
For Jesus. Born-again believer. You must be born again.
Right. It's the Protestant understanding. My understanding, what I can see in the Bible, that one must be born again. That's the starting point of, I think, what is it? Confucius said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Well, for the Christian, the first step is you got to be born again before you go on the journey. So I think that's accurate. So we have the book of life, which we thank God, literally, that we're in that book. And then the other book is, it's called by many names. I would like to call it, This Is Your Life. Again, I'm referencing old shows nobody remembers, but they used to, bring on somebody in this game. It was kind of like a game show. Bring them on, and then they would go over their life, all the different things in their life. And if I remember right, at the end, they'd bring somebody they knew from their old life into the studio. But that's what it's going to be, I believe, is basically there are 2 kinds of people. The people that says, I know I'm not good enough. Don't play my life. I don't want to see that. I'm with this guy over here. And this guy over there is called Jesus. So if you're in Jesus, you're with him. It reminds me of like going to a fancy country club, which I've never gone to, but I know it's kind of works like this. Basically, let's say you go to the biggest, bestest country club for golf or whatever in Beverly Hills. Well, I know I'm not going to get in and I'm not going to be able to pay for it. However, if you're with, let's say, a celebrity and you're his buddy and you're not a member, you just go in. And if they try to stop you, go, oh, I'm with this guy over here. Oh, yes, sir. Oh, then all of a sudden you're golden. They treat you like a king. So I think that's how it's going to be. Once you say, I'm with Jesus, then end of story. There's no more questioning. There's no more. Let's look in the book of life and book of deeds or whatever and see what you've done. So I think it's going to be like a virtual reality, whatever type of situation. However it's going to be done, it's going to be spiritual. But basically, your entire life is going to be. Remember how people say, I almost died, they're falling off a building. Oh, I saw my whole life flash before me. I think that is a real thing. I think they actually did see it. And I think in heaven, all that's recorded. Everything you've ever done is recorded. So you're going to be judged in one of two ways. You're either in the book of life, which means you're not judged, or I should say your proxy, Jesus, is the one that's judged. And so basically, when you come before the judge, the Father, and Jesus, it's going to be, you're either judged by Jesus because you're in him. He's your, what do they call, judge advocate or something? I don't know. It's like, when you go before. Yeah, so he's going to be our advocate. And so he's going to stand up for us and say, yep, yeah, I know this guy. He's good. Or you're going to be on the other side where you said, like with the crowd, I will not have this man to rule over us. And what they're really saying is, I'm my own God. My works are all I need to get in. And they'll say, go ahead and play it. And unfortunately, they're condemning themselves by their own lives and their own mouths, because God is going to say, the standard is the life of Jesus. Now I'm going to play your life. If your life matches up to the life of Jesus, you're good. Guess what? Not a single one of the unbelievers will pass that test. So it's either you're prideful, self-centered, egotistical, you believe in yourself, humanism, some stupid religion. I worship rats at the rat temple, whatever it is, God's going to say, buzzer's going to sound, and you're gone. So you're off to your eternal, they say damnation. We don't use that word very much anymore. But what it's going to be is eternal separation from God. You're going to have been at the throne judgment, seen God, seen Jesus, seen the angels, seen everything that's written in this book. And you're going to, having known that, know that you could have had all that, which is way beyond what we can hope or think. You are then going to be eternally separated from that. And all eternity, you will constantly remember that, and that you could have had that, but that you chose Satan. Because really there is nobody following themselves. That's the big fallacy. Every human being is either following Jesus or they're following the devil. There is nobody else you're following. I know you think you are. But the Bible says that the people are taken captive by the devil at his will. Talking about unbelievers. Because that's true. I mean, you say, oh, I had this thought. Well, actually, you didn't have that thought. Somewhere along the way, it's either that thought came from God or that thought came from the devil. Doesn't mean the devil directly put it in or a demon put it into your mind. But the devil in this world, he's the God of this world, the Bible says. Put it out there. You bought into it. Now you're thinking that thought. Oh, I thought that was my thought. I thought it up myself. No, you didn't. Don't kid yourself. So it's either you're thinking the word of God or you're thinking the word of Satan. There are only two words. So just about everything I hear on the TV and in the media is all the word of Satan. It's not labeled. They need a truth in advertising. It should say down at the bottom, this opinion is the opinion, not necessarily the opinion of God. That's what it should say. But anyway, let's go on. So basically, choose your side. Which book are you going for? The book of life or the book of, oh, I'm so great? Because the book of I'm so great is not going to make it. It's not going to cut. It's not going to cut it. Who is that? I'm the greatest, Muhammad Ali. Well, that's the world. The world loved that because that's what they said in their hearts. In their hearts, they're saying, oh, I'm the greatest. He's the greatest. I'm the greatest. But you're not the greatest. And Jesus said, he who would be the greatest is servant of all, the least. Yeah. So it's just the opposite. Anyway, the great white throne judgment. Oh my goodness, time is flying. We're about halfway done though. Okay. So on this slide, Revelation 20, again, that's the focus today, 11 through 15, and I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it. From his presence, the earth and sky fled away, and no place. Well, so basically he's so bright, he's so intense that he is there's nothing else to look at. When you're in the presence of God, there is nothing else. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. I think there's just two from that. Also, another book was open, which is the book of life. Now, the way it's phrased, there could be more than one book of deeds and works or whatever. So, but we'll just call it generically the book of your deeds. And, the dead were judged by what was written in the books, by what they had done. So when you're talking about the book or books of your life, your deeds, your goodness, your self-righteousness, it's a matter of, you're going to stand before God. And the sea gave up the dead in it. I'm just going to throw this out because there's a big debate about cremation or what we call traditional burial, which, by the way, comes from the Egyptians. It's a pagan concept. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Everybody in my family, everybody I know goes through that, has in the past. But there are people that were at sea for all of eternity, I shouldn't say all of eternity, but all human history were their boats. There were people that were in the sea in a boat, and the boat sank and they died. And they weren't embalmed and they weren't put in the ground. So it's kind of a superstitious thing. It's, if I'm not embalmed and put in the ground in a box somewhere, then God can't raise me up. That was the primitive thinking. But here it says that doesn't matter, because what happens, don't want to be gross, but what happens when sailors and their ship perishes and they die in the ocean? Well, creatures live in the ocean. And unfortunately, creatures, will make quick work of them. So they're going to end up with being bones. But it gets worse because you say, oh, yeah, but at least I have my skeleton all intact sitting on the bottom. No, those bones will be all over the place. So in other words, what is the difference between that and cremation? That's my thinking. Nothing, because I think we're confusing the physical with the spiritual. You are not a physical body. And that's the whole idea of going to heaven and everything else, is that, your physical body is just, what did some guys say, called it a life suit. I like that. So when your life suit is no longer necessary, you cast it away. It goes to the ultimate goodwill. Well, maybe not. But the whole idea is that, you are a spiritual entity. And so when God resurrects you, he's not resurrecting the old bag of bones. He's not going after the old bag of bones. You are a spiritual being, and you will receive, just like Jesus did, a new spiritual body. So if you're cremated, it doesn't matter, because it's the same exact overall theory or concept as if you were lost at sea. So I'm not saying, shouldn't go through the burial ritual. Makes people feel good. It's traditional. You're not going to change that overnight. But I'm just saying, if for some reason your relatives are cremated or you've made that choice, I don't see a problem with that. Maybe somebody does. And death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. Now, I had a debate with my daughter yesterday about this. She says death and Hades are spirits. And I said, well, are they demons or fallen angels? So anyway, that's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin argument. There's no way to prove that. So, but it does distinctly divide death and Hades. Personally, I think it's kind of all one concept, but anyway, you can study that one. But this is the second death. So the important thing to understand is that the first death, for most people, not for those raptured, but for most people, the first death is physical death, and you're cremated or you are embalmed or whatever happens. But it's the second death is the one Jesus always focused on to be aware of, because the second death is where you will die as a spiritual being. Unbelievers will die in the sense of being separated from God, and whatever form of punishment is there. That's a debate, but another thing. Personally, I think that it's all in a different dimension. I don't think it's in the earthly dimension. And the reason I don't believe that is because There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So if hell is in the center of the earth, which people have traditionally believed, and then all of a sudden the old earth and heavens are burned up, it says renovated, and there's a new heaven and a new earth. What happened to all those guys in the middle of the earth? It doesn't make sense. So I personally believe it's in a different dimension. And that's why Jesus could just in an instant walk through a wall, because he was going from one dimension to another, not from a place to a place. But that's my personal theory. Okay, if anyone's name's not found in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So there's only two ways to go. It's like you're going on a journey and you come to a dividing point on your highway. Right? You can go to the right or you can go to the left. There is no third way to go. And so everybody in their journey of life, depending on what they've chosen, is going to go one direction or the other. And it reminds me of the two crowds, Jesus, at the trial of Jesus and the time of his crucifixion, where they had two votes, if you will, right? One group said, I won't have this man to rule over us, and give us Barabbas. They wanted a murderer. And the other group said, free Jesus, free Jesus. Well, there's only two crowds that have ever existed in the history of the world. You're in one of those two crowds. Now, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm just sitting on the fence. It'll all pan out in the end. Well, yeah, it'll pan out for you. You'll be pan and fry, because that's not going to work. If you're not sold out for Jesus, then if you're not born again, which is being sold out, place to start, if you will, in your journey, then you've made your decision. There is no neutrality. He who is not for me is against me. And so this concept here that I have in the slide, going on a little bit further, is about the new heavens and the new earth. And that's what I was referring to a minute ago, the fact that everything we know right now, the physical universe as we know it, is not going to exist as we know it. What form is it going to take? God has not given us great detail on that. And we're looking at Revelation 21:1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, which implies the old one and the old earth are gone. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Well, passed away, sea was no more. Not sure why the sea disappears, because I kind of like the sea. Well, we'll have to have a talk when I get up there. But at any rate, so it's going to disappear. And that's another reason in my mind, I think it's probably a different dimensional situation, because the sea and the earth, everything we know is in this present three-dimensional world, but God is not in the three-dimensional world. I mean, I'm saying he works in it, but that's not him. That's not his essence. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven. This is my favorite part. Prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So there's a new city called the New Jerusalem coming out of heaven. Okay. This thing is gigantic. Okay. So, I mean, here you are, you're standing wherever you are, and like John was, and he sees this thing coming down like the biggest spaceship in history. And it's coming down from wherever it is to the new earth. I mean, can you imagine seeing that? I mean, you'd be dumbstruck. Your mouth would be falling open. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling of God is with men. Okay, well, obviously God through the Holy Spirit is in us now. And in the millennium, Jesus is going to be in Jerusalem on his throne. But here we have, I believe, a different level. We're going to a new level, a new dimension where God is dwelling with men, and we're going to be his people, and God himself will be with them. In other words, there's going to be a continuum of holiness and God power throughout the entire existence of the new earth, the new heavens, and the new Jerusalem. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain, or any more of the former things, because they passed away. I think when I say people, I should say ministers read this at funerals. I've heard it being read at funerals. So, but it begs the question, are we even going to remember any of that? See, it's like, it doesn't go into details.
Sorry.
Uh-oh. Looks like time. Time's not up, but we're getting a message from headquarters. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
No, it's perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Okay. Yeah, to make me be quiet, right? Okay. Next week, we're going to go to Genesis 2.0, the final chapter of the book. And it looks like I'm not going to have enough time to read the New Jerusalem. But I would like to say, throw out a pet theory of mine. In fact, in seminary, I gave, I guess we'll call it a dissertation on it from the Greek. But I put these pictures up here of artist conceptions of the new heaven, the new earth on fire over there, and this ethereal city coming down, shown in the clouds. Great stuff. However, I like the upper left picture, which shows the size. I do believe from what I've seen that's accurate. In other words, you see United States is under that cube. It'll take the whole United States, as far as the area, to be able to contain or be the foundation of where it will sit. Not that it's going to be here, but in other words, to give you a perspective. And however, I personally believe that it's not a square, it's not a cube, that it's a pyramid. And the reason I believe that is based on the Greek wording. Jesus is referred to as the chief cornerstone in Peter, 2 Peter 2:9, right in there, where it talks about the fact that we are built into a building of God. Like every saint is a brick in the building. You're a brick, you're a brick, you're a brick, I'm a brick. And so it's fitted into the building of God. But then it says the chief cornerstone is Jesus Christ. Well, there's a problem with that, because the word cornerstone can mean the first stone laid before you build the building. But apparently from the context, it's not talking about that. It's talking about like the pyramid in Cheops in Egypt, which I believe was the first one built. That on the top, you're supposed to have a capstone. I think the English Bibles usually say capstone or chief cornerstone. So there's only one stone that's the chief stone in a structure of any kind, and that's a pyramid. I mean, just geometry, you know. Basically, if you have a cube, then you have four corners. None of them is chief. None of them fits that description. So I think it's very much like that. I also believe, according to Isaiah 19:19, which says at the end of time, there will be a pillar, an obelisk, a monument. Maybe that's a better way to translate it. A monument in the midst or middle of Egypt. And right between the delta, which is the northern border of Egypt, down to the southern border, right in the middle of that is a pyramid. And that pyramid's called the Great Pyramid. That pyramid was never a tomb. It has no writing on it. Nobody was ever buried there. Nothing was ever found inside it. It in no way resembles any of the others, which I believe were copies. The people that came along later tried to emulate that, and Khufu and his people, and so every tomb they've ever opened, inside you find, like King Tut, right? You find a sarcophagus with a mummy, and you find all kinds of artifacts. That's why people looted that, because they were buried with their gold and treasures. But in the big pyramid, there were no evidence that it was ever a burial tomb of any kind. And the only thing it has inside of it is made out of red granite, is a 6-foot sarcophagus with no lid. And many people, especially in the old, 100 years ago or so, when they first found out about this, believed that that pyramid was built by God and not by any people. And I'm of that opinion.
What's the name of the obelisk again? The Great Pyramid?
The Great Pyramid. You can just Great Pyramid, Google it, you'll see it. It's named, they say it's named after somebody they believe built it. Of course, I believe they're wrong, but it's Cheops, Cheops, depending on how you pronounce it. But that's the person they credit it with. However, the capstone, unlike all the others, was never found. That's because, in my belief system, is that whole thing, it encompasses all the details of the entire universe. And I know you say, oh, that's New Age stuff. No, realize that Satan was always mimic and tried to mimic. Remember, I've talked about that many times, God. So just like the men, when the men came along, either pre-flood or right after the flood, I believe it probably was there before the flood. But the thing is that it talks about in Job, it talks about the fact that God asked him, where were you when I laid the foundation stones? And everything it talks about there, think the Great Pyramid, and it all lines up. But the thing is, the reason there's no capstone, of course, archaeologists say, oh, well, somebody stole it. They go, all kinds of excuses. It's because the capstone has never been on earth ruling yet. And the capstone has to be made of gold. So it's interesting, though, because there's absolutely no reason for that. They still, to this day, have no idea why it was built like that. All the other ones, the burial chambers are underneath the pyramid. This burial chamber is in the middle of it. How do you even build that? So, I mean, the more you study it and think about what I'm talking about, you'll go, So what if the angels, it says the angels were there building it, and this whole thing, here's a big one. There were 7 wonders of the ancient world. Guess how many are gone? 6. There's only one standing. From thousands and thousands and thousands of years, there's only one of the great wonders of the world, which is still standing, which is a witness to people from God. That's what I believe. That's what it's talking about in Isaiah 19:19. So that's the only monument from antiquity, which the famous ones that's left. Because God put it there so it cannot be moved. The stones, I just want to say one thing. At least it's got an idea. I just want to say this. Today, we cannot build it. With all our technology, we cannot build it. Lisa?
So you're saying that there's 7 wonders, there's only 6 are gone, and this is one of the great wonders?
It was, yeah. It's the only one. So if you look up 7 ancient wonders of the world, Google it, it will list them all, like the Colossus statue of Rose. It fell in the ocean, and on and on. So basically, it's an interesting thought, but I believe in some sense that it was put there by God as an indestructible monument, witness for God and testimony against man's evil. Because it is something that is always there, that from it you can get the measurements of every mathematical equation, and it points to perfect north. At least it did at the time it was built. And I can go on and on and on, but it's amazing. So, and once you realize that all the others are just poor copies that man made, trying to aggrandize themselves, that this one, nobody ever laid in this one, because there was no grave that could contain Jesus. He was never in that red granite sarcophagus, because that's a witness, like, he's going to die, but he will not stay in the grave. He's the chief capstone, but that capstone has never been put on the building. Anyway, it's kind of mysterious. I know some of that's speculation, but a number of people do believe that. And as far as it being a pyramid, boy, I'm way over, aren't I? What can I do, baby?
Wrap it up.
I'm going to have to wrap it up. I'll just throw out one little ditty here in this slide. Of course, I'll have it uploaded. In Revelation 21, I want you to think about one more thing while you read down here. I believe the New Jerusalem is made out of solid light. It is not a physical building. And I believe if you look at all these stones, that they are the spectrum of light. Know how our spectrum is, from red at the bottom to ultraviolet, purple at the above? All of these, the city is made out of pure light. And that's why God is the light of it. His light shines through the entire city because it's translucent. I could go on and on, but anyway, so it makes sense because it's from another dimension. God is light. His dimension is light, not the earth.